Hey, welcome to another tutorial. This one's actually not going to be a Nanostudio 2 tutorial, strictly speaking. It's going to be more of a production tip, but we are going to use Nanostudio 2 to sort of explain the gist of this video. So what this video is going to be dealing with is I'm going to talk about my approach and my way of thinking in regards to EQing kick drums. If you're wondering why I'm going to devote a whole video just to that subject matter, it's basically because in modern recording, the kick drum has become central. You know, it always has been, but ever since, I guess, hip-hop came on the scene, sort of changed the game, and this is filtered out to all genres where if you don't have a really good and well-defined and with a good bottom-end kick drum, it's going to be very hard to make your entire mix sound up to par and compelling when compared to other mixes out there. So in order to talk about this better, I'm going to use a example kick drum that sort of has a very full frequency range, you know, from the sub end all the way to the very high top end. So I'll just play that kick for you right now. Right, so from there you hear that it's got, you know, a good amount of room reverb along with the bottom end and the top end. So basically what I just detailed there is not very detailed, you know, it's low end, high end, right? But when I think about kick drums, I tend to think about them in 5 main character bands across the EQ spectrum. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to use a plugin where I can isolate the different EQ bands and sort of show you what they sound like. So on the very low end, we have the subs, of course, which are, you know, lower than maybe about 60 hertz. And then directly up from that, we have somewhere around the 90 hertz, you know, from maybe say 70 hertz to 180 or 200 hertz. You have what I'd call the fundamental, which is usually, you know, where you see the big hump when you are looking at an EQ spectrum. And I'll talk about this more in a minute. Directly above that, in sort of the low-mid frequency range, you know, around 250 to, you know, 400, 500 hertz, you have what I call boxiness, which can give, or you can call it knock. It has like a knocky sort of sound to it. And this can give a lot of definition to the kick and help cut through the mix usually, but it's not really bassy. It doesn't have real, you know, that real kick. And then in much of the high range, above that, we have what I call air or room. You know, so usually this is room reverb or any sort of high frequency content that sort of gives an airy quality to it. And somewhere in that range and even higher is the click or rattle, which is usually just the attack. You know, it's just a very short, maybe 10 millisecond, not even, attack to the kick. And even though this is really short in duration and a very small part of a kick, and in the upper range, which is not really, you know, what you think about when you think about kick drums, it actually has a huge impact on the sense of how much power a kick has, and I'll talk about how to EQ that as well. All right, so turning back to Nanostudio 2, again, we have the kick here. I have it loaded up in Slate. So I'm just going to record this kick so I can have a steady rhythm, and then use the visual EQ effect insert to EQ it further. All right, so we're going to just use an insert effect because that'll give me a better visualization of, you know, with this frequency analyzer basically. This basically shows me the amount of energy in all of those different character bands that I talked about. So depending on what I want to do with this kick, I will EQ it accordingly. So usually the first thing I do with a kick like this, which I like the tone of it, but, you know, it has all of that reverb or air to it, is start carving at that air to get a better sense of the bass definition. And, you know, unlikely that the air is sitting at just exactly the range I want it to. So for that, I'm just going to enable this and start start to bring it down and sort of get a sense for where that mainly sits. And then if I think I want to just carve out a little more, I use the band width. That's pretty good. You'll notice that does affect considerably the attack of that kick, because of course a lot of the attack is in that high frequency range, and I'll talk about how to handle that in a second. Now, because it sounds almost too subby, or too much almost like a sine wave kick, I want to add a little bit more of those low mids or upper bass range, the boxiness, sort of fundamental that I was talking about before. So I'm going to create a bell EQ here, and around this range, I'm going to just bring it up. See how it creates like a boom? It's like a boominess, If I... And a principle that I keep in mind whenever I EQ or really do an effect of any kind is I use an extreme setting so I can really hear what that particular control is doing at that, in this case, a really extreme loud peak to this band range. So I can really hear the frequency, what that frequency range does to that sound. And I can actually use the clipping as an indicator for where I'm veering too much into the basses, to the real bass. The sub almost, really. And I don't want that. I just want the boominess and the boxiness to come through. I could dial that back now. There we go. And maybe as a consequence of that, because when you reduce EQ in a certain range, you can almost look at it like it's the same thing as boosting it in another range. So if you reduce a bunch of highs, it's kind of the same as boosting the lows. So in this case, I've boosted that boxy sort of fundamental range right here, but maybe I'm losing a little bit of the sub range. And in this case, it's probably overstating things to say that I'm affecting the sub range with boosting that, but for the sake of argument, let's just say I want to compensate for that lack of sub definition. I'll dial up another, because I only have 4 or 3 bands in that EQ, so I'm going to dial up another EQ so I can now affect the subs. So I'll just use a regular shelf for that. There we go. And for that attack, you can kind of see here, right around 5,000 hertz. That's, I think, right where the attack, kind of the click of the attack sits right now. So I could do a really tight peak there to bring that out more. And again, extreme settings just to hear what that band is exactly doing to the sound. Yeah, kind of like that. Just really that high, sort of gritty rattle. It might sound subtle, and in a lot of cases it is, but especially if you have headphones on, you can properly mix this, and it actually could make a huge difference in how the kick cuts through the mix once all these other frequencies are piled on top, and make it much harder to get the definition of the kick. So we'll just A-B the original with what we affected here. So this is the original. At this point, it almost doesn't sound like a kick. It just sounds like a really... just sounds like a bunch of room reverb, really. But with the EQ, it's maybe a little too boomy, too bassy, but look at how big of a difference we've already done. And we haven't even sculpted it with anything like dynamics, compression, and so on, which I'm actually going to push that aside into the next companion video to this. Sort of goes together, compression and EQ, especially on kick drums. But now what I'm going to do is something a little bit more dramatic. I'm going to just, carve out all of the highs almost with a high shelf. So almost like a low pass. Yeah. So what do you do then when you maybe, here, I'll just bring this down a bit. Maybe more of the fundamental. Yeah, so what do you do now? Like maybe you wanted the kick to sound kind of round like that, really bassy, not a lot of highs. Especially in something like hip hop versus say rock kick drums, you're generally going to want something that's just mostly bass. But what if you want that attack? You've carved it out because you've gotten rid of all of those high frequency parts of the sound. So what I usually do in this circumstance is I'm going to go to where it's being triggered, and I'm going to layer an attack over it, but I'm not going to layer it through the sample layer here because I'm going to want to put an envelope on it and also EQ out all the bass so that doesn't conflict. So what I'm going to do is just choose another pad. Usually I choose one far away from the pad here where the kick is stationed so that we don't accidentally hit what is essentially going to be a layer. It's not supposed to be a playable pad. So I look at the MIDI note on that pad and I replicate it. So that's MIDI note 48 and I replicate that here, 48. So now when I load up a sample, which I'm just gonna load up from the factory kits, I'm just going to choose one that I think I like the click of the attack, There we go, kick solid. So now they play together, right? But they're overlapping, and I don't want this for the bass range at all. I just want the attack. So I'm actually going to just mute this, which actually, yeah. So I'm just going to mute this pad. And there we go. So I can just focus on the one with the attack that I like. And for the envelope here, I'm just going to make it really quick. Maybe I just want the first something like that. Just the first, 20 milliseconds, something like that. And I'm going to want to carve out that bass range because I just want the click. Put this on effects bus 1. And I'll just carve all of this out. There we go. So we basically just have the attack. I have to really make it quite a bit louder to bring it up to par. Unmute the original. See the difference there? I added the attack back in. But it still needs to be louder, I think. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do a quick and dirty thing here. So I'm just going to distort it to make it loud enough. There we go. All right, so that better demonstrates the difference. That's, we're talking about just 20 milliseconds of a little high frequency click. See how big of a difference it has on the sound of the kick, the power of it? Considerable, right? So if you want to now sort of shape the attack a little bit, you can just, bring up the attack on the attack to sort of soften it. It really changes the character considerably. Look at that. That's very different if you ask me. If you need to wear headphones to hear that, then I recommend you do that. And by a similar token, sometimes you're not happy with the sub or the real bass range of the kick. So just, you can do the same thing, right? Just in this case, I'm gonna EQ out those subs. I basically have the boxiness and the attack now. And then I'm just gonna put, an 808 or something here. Where's a good 808 when you need one? That's good enough. Sub. Got some clipping here. So I'll just shape that really quickly. There we go. And what was that? Note 48, so it overlaps with the others. There we go. So we got subs back. And, of course, you can continue shaping that even more. And you go from what was, a very different sounding original, and with just like some choice EQ, you can make it exactly what you want and hopefully better sit in your mix. All right, in the next tutorial, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use dynamics, compression and parallel compression, limiting, side chaining even a little bit to further sculpt the kick in the context of the mix. All right, so hopefully I'll see you there.